Horror is perhaps the most fertile of all genres where sequels are concerned. If one horror movie is successful, its formula can be repeated, perhaps with some minor variations, for a good while before audiences typically lose interest. But not all sequels to horror movies are created equal, and sometimes the filmmakers at the forefront want to do something different than just give viewers more of what they've already seen. Sometimes a horror sequel won't actually be a horror movie at all. It'll ditch the genre almost entirely and fashion itself as something quite different. This is obviously a considerable risk, both artistically and commercially, though it goes without saying that it can pay off dividends if a filmmaker has a smart idea for hopping to a new genre. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 horror movie sequels that ditched the horror. Number 10. Megan 2.0. Though the first Megan was a relatively tepid PG-13 horror movie, it was still absolutely a horror movie, revolving around a murderously protective AI doll which preys upon anyone who interferes with its young owner, Katie. The recent sequel, Megan 2.0, though, director Gerard Johnston set in motion a massive genre pivot, ditching the horror almost entirely for a sci-fi action black comedy. There's very little in the way of suspense or unease this time around. Megan 2.0 is very much a tongue-in-cheek riff on Terminator 2, in which a resurrected Megan faces off against a new robotic antagonist, Amelia. The high-tech shenanigans are dialed up to 11. The action is more acrobatic and choreographed, and the comedy is far more silly, ensuring that the mild horror of its predecessor is basically nowhere to be seen. Abandoning what made the first film such a surprise hit with teens probably explains why Megan 2.0 flopped at the box office. Number 9. Army of Darkness. Sam Raimi's Evil Dead is one of the most protean franchises in horror history, if not cinema as a whole. The original The Evil Dead is a pretty straight-laced horror flick, while Evil Dead 2 daringly ventured into riotous, slapstick-driven horror comedy to enormous success. For threequel Army of Darkness, Raimi switched things up again to the extent that it can barely be called a horror movie at all. It ultimately feels like a dark fantasy action comedy, centered around Ash as he battles the undead in the Middle Ages. Army of Darkness is basically a campy fantasy film that just so happens to have time travel and deadites in it. To call it a far cry from the first two films, especially the first, is quite the understatement. However, both 2013's Evil Dead remake and 2023's Evil Dead Rise returned to the gnarlier, less kooky thrills of the original Evil Dead, a vibe which the series now seems to have settled on, seemingly for good. Number 8. The Chronicles of Riddick. Pitch Black is a terrific sci-fi horror film, and honestly one of Vin Diesel's better movies. A tight, modestly budgeted romp in which a spaceship containing a motley crew of characters crash lands on a desert planet populated by monstrous creatures. Despite the film performing modestly at the box office, Universal was keen to build a franchise out of Pitch Black, with Diesel at the helm, envisioning it as a blockbuster IP. But of course, the horror genre and blockbuster IP typically don't mix. And so the sequel, The Chronicles of Riddick, saw the series detour into sci-fi action territory with a splash of fantasy. The $120 million production, rocking a price tag more than 5 times that of Pitch Black, couldn't have strayed much further from its predecessor's self-contained low-budget style, with its grandiose spectacle and high-level world-building, where Riddick takes on an empire of intergalactic religious fanatics. Though ambitious and somewhat defended by franchise fans these days, The Chronicles of Riddick was a critical and commercial flop upon release, ensuring that the third film, simply titled Riddick, hewed far closer to the style and tone of Pitch Black. A fourth film, Riddick Furia, is currently in post-production and also expected to veer away from the decadent sci-fi vibe of the second movie. Number 7. Aliens. James Cameron's Aliens is the touchstone for a sequel to a horror movie that lurches into another genre. Ridley Scott's original Alien is of course a masterfully executed slow-burn horror film, but when Cameron was brought aboard for the sequel, he had little desire to simply repeat the formula of the first. And so he designed Aliens as a beefy, militaristic action film that's epic and bombastic in all the ways that Alien is slow, subtle, and atmospheric, yet while still managing to deepen the characterization of protagonist Ellen Ripley. While the xenomorphs still retain their inherently visceral appeal, and there are select sequences which rub elbows with the horror genre, the emphasis this time around is on the unrelenting intensity of the sustained high-wire set pieces. Aliens marked such a successful genre shift that numerous other horror and horror-adjacent franchises have attempted to move into sci-fi action territory, often with wildly mixed results. Number 6. The Purge, Anarchy. The original The Purge quite clearly assumed the formula of a home invasion horror movie not entirely unlike The Strangers, albeit with an attention-grabbing dystopian twist, given that it takes place in a reality where one night per year all crime is made legal for 12 hours. Yet following the success of the low-budget original, the series' scope was significantly expanded, given that just about everyone wanted to see The Purge going on outside rather than focusing on the comparatively dull premise of a family hiding inside their home. And so The Purge Anarchy basically gave the people what they wanted, largely eschewing the claustrophobic horror of its predecessor for a more sprawling, revenge-fueled action film, in which Frank Grillo plays totally not the Punisher as he embarks on a mission to avenge his son's death. Anarchy's commercial success cemented its more John Carpenter-inspired, action-centric style as the go-to for the series moving forward, and it never really got close to the pure horror of the original film ever again, mostly for the better. Number 5. Glass. M. Night Shyamalan's Split more or less follows the formula and style of a horror film, focused as it is on the Horde, a man with dissociative identity disorder whose 24 distinct personalities range from placid to wildly murderous. The film ended with a surprise reveal that it was actually a stealth sequel to Shyamalan's cult classic 2000 superhero thriller Unbreakable, teeing up a third film which would see the Horde face off against Unbreakable's protagonist David Dunn and supervillain Mr. Glass. But the threequel Glass almost entirely ditched the moody horror vibes of its predecessor, functioning instead as a deconstructionist riff on the superhero genre, with some conspiracy thriller drama fare thrown in for good, or as many might believe it, bad, measure. The genre shift ultimately wasn't the problem with Glass, though. It was the fact that Shyamalan delivered a movie that was totally unsatisfying, seemingly on purpose, as if to stick two fingers up at the superhero genre itself. No bueno. Number 4. The Mummy Returns. Though 1999's The Mummy reboot is absolutely inspired by the action-adventure vibes of the Indiana Jones franchise, it still retains enough of that classic Universal monsters flavour that you can plausibly call it a horror film. There's a shudder-worthy emphasis on body horror in numerous sequences, especially those involving scarabs, ensuring that The Mummy is far more than just another sub-indie globe-trotting actioner. The film was a colossal box office success, though for 2001's sequel, The Mummy Returns, the decision was made to seriously dial back the gnarly horror aspect. Instead, this follow-up leaned far more into fantastical action and buddy comedy, a tone which was also upheld by the third and final movie, The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, though the less said about that one the better. The Mummy Returns is still a solid enough sequel, though disappointingly light on horror elements compared to its predecessor, except for that eyesore-inducing Scorpion King CGI, of course. Number 3. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Try though some might to tell you otherwise, The Terminator is absolutely a horror film. A pulse-quickening sci-fi action flick in which a murderous cyborg chases down the literal mother of humanity's future like a slasher movie villain. From its scuzzy, low-budget style, creepy stop-motion animation and all, to the unnerving star-making presence of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the title role, The Terminator is an unrelentingly unnerving experience. But just as James Cameron did for the Alien franchise, he too did for his own creation, as Terminator 2 Judgment Day shifted into pure sci-fi action territory, trading the lo-fi eeriness of its predecessor for mega-budget set pieces, jaw-dropping visual effects, and a surprisingly emotional story about what it means to be human and machine. Of all the genre shifts on this list, T2 is surely the most successful, given that it grossed $520 million worldwide compared to the Terminator's $78.3 million, and near instantly cemented itself as one of the greatest action films of all time. Number 2. Happy Death Day to You. Happy Death Day was a clever and funny Groundhog Day-inspired take on the prototypical slasher movie, revolving around Tree, a woman who gets caught in a time loop and is forced to relive the same day every time she's murdered. While director Christopher Landon could have easily just done the slasher movie thing of repeating the same formula ad nauseum until the box office grosses dried up, for Happy Death Day to You, he ambitiously nudged the horror to the periphery and delivered a full-blown wacky sci-fi comedy. The sequel is far more interested in explaining the timey-wimey shenanigans at the core of the franchise, while ratcheting up the original's black comedy into something considerably goofier. It's certainly an entertaining sequel, albeit one that didn't hit for everyone, some feeling that Landon ultimately strayed a little too far from the novelty of the original concept, as was likely reflected by the film's disappointing box office performance. Despite this, Landon recently confirmed that a third film is finally moving forward. Number 1. The Invisible Woman. You have to hand it to Universal with their original run of the Invisible Man movies. They didn't stick around in any one genre for too long. While both 1933's The Invisible Man and its 1940 sequel The Invisible Man Returns were sci-fi horror films, the third film in the series, The Invisible Woman, also released in 1940, took a sharp left turn into the screwball comedy genre. The threequel opts for an altogether more light-hearted look at the applications of invisibility, with protagonist Kitty Carroll using her newfound powers to, for example, get revenge on her arsehole former boss. The franchise didn't let up here either. The fourth movie, Invisible Agent, ventured into spy action territory, before The Invisible Man's revenge pinged back to sci-fi horror, and finally Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man was a pure sci-fi comedy. Imagine a modern take on a Universal monster franchise being this adventurous from installment to installment.